This is Including You, the new series from Lead at Any Level. Including You features stories from chief diversity officers and other executives who are creating inclusive cultures in their organizations. Our goal is to show what's working in companies just like yours, to give you the tools you need to keep pushing for progress in your own workplace. We want to create belonging and opportunity for everyone, including you. And now here's your host, Amy C. Waninger.
Welcome back to Including You. I'm your host, Amy C. Waninger, the Inclusion Catalyst. My guest today is Beth Throne, JD. She is the Senior Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Adjunct Professor at Franklin and Marshall College, a residential coeducational liberal arts college with approximately 2,000 undergraduate students from 43 states and 50 countries. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Absolute pleasure.
I'm excited to talk to you. I think higher education often gets overlooked in corporate discussions because people don't realize higher education is where all of the talent pipeline is happening. And so much of not just the talent pool, but the consumer pool for the goods and services that companies provide is coming out of college now. So if we want to understand the economy, we need to be talking to folks in higher ed.
I appreciate that. And you figure that, yes, it's the talent pipeline. And it's the place where industry and fields can come into the curriculum to even better prepare students early for what may come next and customize that pipeline a bit. So the marriage is both ways. It's a very reciprocal relationship that we have with employers and community partners. So I appreciate that frame.
Thank you. So I'm curious, why is inclusion so important at Franklin and Marshall College?
Why it's important. It should be important everywhere. But the way that we approach our work, and I'll talk from the frame of my area, which is preparing students for life and leadership, and not just work, but certainly work as well beyond college. We have the most diverse generation in history right now with Generation Z, and Alpha coming up after it is no different. And so when we are educating students, we have to reach them where they are at with their lived experience and their perspectives, their truth, and then also prepare them for a world where they have to be able to fit, where they have to be able to adapt and relate with a fluency across generations, across lived experience and identities that was not as robust as previous generations, such as mine, Generation X, or before. So this is a transformational, incredibly important time for students and for the institutions that are preparing them early for what's next. So it's adapting to them and also producing this beautiful trajectory for our students, customized to where they want to go in a workplace that's more diverse than ever.
You're a residential college, so a lot of the students that are coming to you are away from home for the first time. They've left whatever cultural bubble they were raised in for the first time, and they may be seeing intercultural interactions. They may be exposed to things for the first time that they've never seen before. Regardless of where they come from or who they are, they're probably hitting some cultural differences.
Yes.
Maybe for the first time in their lives, especially if they come from privileged backgrounds. When you think about they're navigating a space, yes, they're the most diverse generation, but they may not have the most exposure personally.
Yes.
You're bringing them into a very diverse mix of folks that's designed to help them interact. Then you're going to send them off into a world that is not designed to help them interact. That's a huge transition in and a huge transition out. What are you doing that you think is really moving the needle for these students in ways that will serve them long term?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the first frame to talk about is the fact that DEI work, right, or DEI JMB, whatever frame we're giving it, it's a lens through which we see all of our work. It is not, sometimes I find that in higher education that folks talk about what I would call parachute programs, which is let's come in and do this program on navigating life as an LGBTQ student. Let's do first generation college student. Let's do some training on anti-racist practices. And I call them parachute programs because they're not consistent culture building, culture edifying programs. That's where we place ourselves at Franklin and Marshall. It is the job of faculty and professional staff and even of the student employees who are serving as the agents of the institution and stewarding the student experience curricularly or co-curricularly. And it's not, and I also want to qualify, it's also just not only parachute programs, it's not the job of just a chief diversity officer and an office. It is the culture. And so what we do, it begins with the messaging as a prospective student and understanding not all students can or will come to campus. Belonging doesn't start at orientation. It should definitely be, right? Orientation and move-in, but it's beforehand. And so for us, designing an inclusive experience where people feel welcome, seen, heard, valued, starts at how people feel and how they're welcome to the application process, into a virtual visit, into that space. In end of March, I'm going to be involved in a webinar with several of my colleagues talking about how we prepare students early for life beyond. And I'm mindful even of the accessible space of giving people time to think of neurodiverse students, how they may process. So how we design each piece of this experience from, again, perspective through orientation. What are we addressing on orientation? How are we setting that space? To your point, we have students who come from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, some students who may have not had such a diverse experience where they are suddenly majoritized or minoritized, represented or underrepresented in this ecosystem that we have. So how we design our programs, the pace, the frequency, how we mentor and advise, how we hire. And so this is the lens of who are we hiring for housing assistants, otherwise known as RAs at other institutions? How are we hiring staff? How are we working with faculty and pedagogy in the classroom? How are we equipping students to enter into the world? If there are unpaid or minimally paid summer experiences that can't be equitably accessed without funding or support, do we have that? And then certainly as the folks navigate through their journey, mentorship by alum, parents, friends of the college, who may share identities, affinities, values, geographic similarities, et cetera. And so it is how and what do we do? It is the lens through which we do all of this. And then afterward, even preserving that affinity and that connection to F&M so that students can look forward and say, you did this, you made it, you navigated, how? Whether I'm a student of color, an F1 international student, a first-gen student, whether I'm a student from Greenwich, Connecticut, who came with a network and wasn't sure how to use it, or a student from another location that wasn't even academically prepared the same way. So it carries through all of that. And the fact that I am spewing through those life cycles shows it's the way that we approach the whole space in the work that we do co-curricularly and curricularly, and not just parachuting in with a program or a training or putting on one particular role, which role is important and impactful, but just not one role at our institution.
There is so much in what you said that is so important. I'm curious though, how are you measuring success from an inclusion lens, DEIBJ, whatever acronym you use? How do you know what you're doing is working?
Yeah, and here's where I won't stand in the shoes of my fabulous colleague, Dr. Gretchel Hathaway, who is our Chief Diversity Officer, because what she would tell you from her lens, if I were tapping into it, the reason why we're doing a climate survey and we're launching that this semester again is to get a pulse that goes beyond anecdote into pure data. So one way we measure success is by having a climate survey that has a high response rate, that guides us as we understand, is our campus a welcoming environment for all students, all faculty, all professional staff. And so the fact that we do that, I would think it's certainly indicative. At a more of a micro level, it is students showing up and out at events and programs, students requesting to partner on events, students providing feedback and not being scared to advocate. So creating that accessible space where there is an ongoing dialogue in the form of programs, in the form of advisement, in the form of campus innovations, that where it is students across the many different demographics and world perspectives that come into this space to say, I would like to improve, by way of example, student employment. for international students as a dialogue that's happening right now. I would like more a partnership on, and we have this, for a women's leadership program to empower women identified students through women identified alum who can share the what I wish I knew. So we have that going on right now. And watching the attendance of those and so many other type of events and initiatives that we co-create in partnership with different departments and student organizations, that to me is success. And quite frankly, towards your opening, it is the type of partnership that the world needs moving forward if organizations are going to recruit and retain qualified talent beyond diversity initiatives, beyond the employee resource groups. And so having and empowering students to step into what is success and helping create that within an institution, I think is parallel. And that is how we look at, measure, and assess it, is by student engagement in that process, and then measuring it through feedback, climate survey, etc. Yeah.
This is brilliant. And I hope employers are paying attention, because the young professionals they're getting ready to receive into their organizations are accustomed to co-creating solutions to problems they themselves have identified.
Yes.
Not being told no,
Right.
not being told we've never done it that way, not being told there's a bureaucratic process for that will ultimately destroy your soul.
Yes.
That you have to, if you run through this gauntlet of bureaucracy, you can eventually maybe get a tenth of what you're asking for. Folks coming into the workforce
Yes.
are accustomed to co-creating solutions to problems they themselves have identified. And if organizations that hire them are not prepared with that sort of a mechanism,
Yes.
and with that attitude, they are going to find it more and more challenging to retain those young professionals. And by the way, young professionals are more entrepreneurial
Yes.
than the folks that have been there for 20 years. They're not only going to become your turnover problem, they're going to become your competition.
An important piece of this too is the education. It's not unique to higher education, but it is certainly endemic to our culture, is we are in the process of educating ourselves as faculty on how do we make sure we ourselves understand our privilege and also understand and can appreciate the lens of difference that our students bring. I respectfully submit, in my experience, having been, I always say I'm a recovering attorney, practiced with fabulous firm, Fox Rothschild, for several years before being recruited into this space. Before that, I worked with a global staffing firm, managed the recruiting operations for 14 offices of a firm. So that's where I'm coming with the statement I'm about to make. Often employers, organizations put it on the students, the diverse, or the students of difference, whatever that difference is, to educate them. And that's a high burden, because students, that puts an extra bit of effort, an extra bit of challenge, an extra bit of, you don't understand me. So to be seen, heard, and valued, I need to educate you about it, what it's like to be a student of color. I need to educate you what it's like to navigate the world as someone who's non-binary. And so that type of space, if we're talking about corporate America, legal America, public sector, nonprofit America, or global, it is also making sure that those organizations are educating themselves on who they're bringing in, so that the burden's not on the workforce to educate them as much as to, we know who you are, we value, we see you, and to have some mechanisms and understandings in place to welcome them. That will show from interview forward, that those are the organizations that my students come back to me saying, that was from who was interviewing them, to how they approach questions, to to how they are on board employee events. Like there's a whole appreciation of, I am already coming educated about what it means to be an inclusive workplace, versus forcing that on us. And in higher education, we already assume, we know that we need to be that for these students. And so launching them into the world with organizations that appreciate that as well is really important.
Absolutely. And this notion of, not only do minoritized individuals have to educate their majoritized colleagues, peers, superiors, supervisors, they have to do it in a way that is non-threatening to all of the preconceived notions and beliefs of the person that they're educating.
Yes.
So if they're effective in their education, it's usually used against them. And yeah, I think to your point, companies who aren't already doing the work falling behind in terms of being able to attract and certainly retain young professionals.
Yeah, and it's not easy work to the extent that I'll give an example that there are, and I have conversations a lot with particular generations, and sometimes geographically, sometimes politically, about what they're willing to accept as other people's truth. So, by way of example, students who go by they, them. And when they go by they, them, there are, they've said there are organizations that they push back. You mean, would she? And when that even pushback, that's not a place where that student's going to be. And there's and fabulous contributing students. And so it's hard to the extent that there is an acceptance. You talk about status quo and policies and practices, but in the way that people are going to welcome difference. And there used to be a thing of agree to disagree. And it's not that people disagree, just have to acknowledge. You don't need to change or convert. It's just knowledge. And that goes even so far I talk often when we have a lot of intercultural gatherings and discussions, even when we're doing leadership development around navigating controversy with civility, which is one of my favorite places to be in leadership development because it's so important to have a diplomatic conversation to disagree, necessary for the workplace, necessary for the world. Even if it's not disagreeing, it's pushing back with a what if that could totally improve policy or practice or client relations or et cetera. What's interesting is sometimes I have students who talk to me about the way that people see them. So I may have a student of color from Jamaica who, and there's this conversation, they said, they keep calling me African-American. I'm not African-American. And it's hard because we have a vernacular that sometimes I think organizations are scared to counter. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to be. But again, turning back, if there's a lot of DEI education, or depending upon the state you live in, if I can, D&I education, then students are going to be, and graduates and those recent grads are going to be so much more powerful, seen and valued, and stay with those organizations that are prepped for them. So
Absolutely.
that's a bit of a soapbox right there, if I can.
No, I appreciate it, Beth. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as you think about Franklin and Marshall College in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, what do you see as the next steps in either advancing, continuing, or adding to your inclusion initiatives there?
Yeah. Let me acknowledge the reality of the demographic cliff for all higher education institutions, especially those in the Northeast. So there is going to be, or in the works in the proximate future, a significant drop of college-bound population, especially in the geographies from which my institution had traditionally recruited, which means being more intentional, and we have, as many other institutions are for years, with where we recruit students from, which also means being welcoming and inclusive for students from different markets, not the Mid-Atlantic through New England, markets where small, private, liberal arts selective institutions, such as SMNM, have traditionally recruited from. What's coming down the road is being more creative, more inclusive, and more prepared as an institution to honor different academic preparation, geographic, global recruitment. And that's really important. Along with that is the financial aid piece. The cost of education is no small joke. It can be made a joke, and it is, right, quite often in media. And that means to make education like Franklin and Marshall accessible, it is investing in aid in our package, what we offer and what makes us distinctive, so that we do not unintentionally recruit a homogeneous population that can afford us, but rather we continue to recruit and welcome students who are going to contribute meaningfully to the world, no matter their financial background, right? Or who are aware of us because we're being more. So it does, again, as I said, the life cycle starts way earlier. Beyond that, I think I'm going to give the overarching answer, though there's a lot of pieces, that it also is continuing to make DEI part of the culture and the work we all do, and not an initiative that is measured by, as I said, parachute programs popping in or on an infrequent basis. And that means a consistent education on how to be a welcoming environment for our colleagues and our employees, as much as it is for our students, as much as it is our parents. What else is coming new is more parent education, more parent access. to what is going on so they themselves feel prepared and versed to support the success of their students. So I know that's a larger frame, but our priorities are there. And the demographic cliff, financial aid. The other piece I would mention is investing increasingly on mental health and wellness, so that students can undertake of all. And there is different stressors that a student may bring given their background and how they're approaching this significant investment in themselves and their future, and increasing access to those counseling resources, watching how we schedule and not overschedule, offering enough space for reflection, break, and joy. Imagine more joy in the community. That's intentional. All of that. So I think coming down the pike for that inclusive space is also honoring the social, emotional, physical, intellectual wellness and health of the students in a way we're not just talking about holistic development. We're actually living and breathing it. That is accessible by all of our students.
This is so important. That last piece, the mental health piece,
Yes,
is especially important. And I know this firsthand from students who do not come from a family or cultural tradition of seeking help for mental health issues.
Yep.
Right?
There's absolute
This might be the first time they've ever encountered support for mental health issues in their lives. And so just that's a tremendous area of focus. And it says a lot, I think, about the culture of the community, of the school, to offer and to put emphasis on that.
And it's something, if I could think, the last couple of weeks, I had a conversation with a student from China earlier this week. And it started with, she's a sophomore, and it started with her talking about her life and her navigation, what she's planning. And she just needed some assurances. I could tell when she walked into my office, I know her energy. And I said, "You're wearing something." I'm going to make up her name. So I'm going to call her Jane for the purpose of this conversation. And I said, "Jane, you're wearing something." I said, "We can talk, but what are you wearing?" There's a weight. There's a weight. And she told me what was going on and the pressure to choose a major that's going to honor her parents, that's going to honor her investment, international student, and if I want to stay and work in the United States. And so there's that space of creating space in an advising appointment to say, "Okay, I know what you want to cover. We're going to go here first," versus another student who is from a very domestic US student who comes from a background of affluence, who feels the pressure to live and breathe into a space she doesn't want to be in. When you come from a family, in this case, a family of professionals, stereotypically for US of law in certain areas, and I could hear it. And if you want to major in English and go into journalism or be a literary agent, in her particular case, what she wears there versus a scholar athlete who is here and is trying to figure out, how do I juggle all of this, perform well on the field, perform in the classroom, and think about my past. So it's such on this, we talk about where you're going on the micro level of being prepared to support students at a school where they can be seen. We're not that large. I can't see you. Then I'm not going to know you. Then I'm not going to know the second time, in this case, Jane, by false name, but Jane, when I saw Jane, this is not Jane. Something's going on with Jane. And I think that has to carry over into the workplace, where students have that recognition and investment of there's something in the workplace, or there's something they're bringing to the workplace they're not performing optimally. And before that performance review or performance improvement plan, maybe figure that out, because you may retain someone long-term who's going to transformationally impact that workplace, grow in the organization, whether it's this way or this way, whatever it is, or become one of your best alum and proponents to refer talent in. They have to be seen, valued that way because you invested in their health. So I think it generalizes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Beth, for your time, for your energy, for your insight. I know that our listeners and audience just appreciate this so much. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I am thrilled at the invitation, and I'm happy if anyone has any follow-up, but happy to be here with you.
Great. Thank you so much. I will put links to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and including youpodcast.com, so people can come find you and connect with you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow Lead at Any Level on LinkedIn and YouTube. Then join us for Including You video simulcast every Thursday at noon Eastern. Including You can also be enjoyed each week as part of the Living Corporate audio podcast series, available on all major podcast platforms. Learn more at living-corporate.com. Including You is brought to you in part by Lead at Any Level, a boutique training and consulting firm improving employee engagement and retention for companies that promote from within. Lead at Any Level. Leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Learn more at leadatanylevel.com. Lead at Any Level and its logo are registered trademarks of Lead at Any Level LLC. The views and opinions of guests on our show do not necessarily reflect the positions of Lead at Any Level, Living Corporate, or the sponsors of Including You.
That's it for this week's edition of Including You. Be sure to join me next week when my guest will be Mariam Shahab,